My name is Tim Cole, and I'm with Waypoint Church Partners that serves churches and leaders around the Mid-Atlantic region. And we have a regular webinar series, the Waypoint 55, that we do every month. It's specifically designed for church leaders, lay leaders typically, and so we have those. Just did one last night for how do you train your safety team. We've had that topic every twice a year about safety team. But this one was, what do you do for training in specific? And so you might want to check that out in a couple of days when you go to our YouTube channel. Our YouTube channel, when we add this webinar to it, will be our 100th training video that we've had in the last 6 years. And so they're on a variety of topics. They're organized in playlists. This one will be, I don't think it'll be in a playlist because we've never dealt with this topic before. But we've got web training webinars for elders, prayer team leaders, mission team leaders, safety and security team leaders, and other areas in the church that are under-resourced with training on how to do your area of ministry better. But we've done a number of these pop-up webinars where some topic comes up, typically more for church staff, to be honest, about how can we help you thrive in ministry. And this topic today is a little controversial, and Josh and I have been talking about that because everybody looks at AI a little cockeyed and say, are we even allowed to go there? And so much less allow it to help me thrive in ministry. And so that's the topic that we're going to be covering today. And I asked my friend Josh Burnett to join us today to share his perspective on this. Josh is a former church planter in our region at Revolution Church in Annapolis. That Waypoint had a very indirect role in some funds from a church that closed, went through Mosaic Church and found its way to Revolution as getting started. And so we claim partnership with Revolution in that way, that we were happy to help them that way. But Josh has left there and now works with Flourish, an organization that he might describe a little bit. But part of that is developing AI tools for ministry. And this is not a commercial for his organization, but I'm happy for him to share what he's doing and how he's learning to use this and really equip ministers to thrive in ministry, not just with AI, but to equip them using technology to thrive in ministry. So I've got a series of questions that I just want to ask Josh as we go. But for me, the genesis of this personally was just this year. You may know the timeline that in November, I believe it was kind of the public release of ChatGPT, and that was kind of the beginning of a new era, I think, for the way we handle information. And it reminds me of all the disruptions we've had over the centuries, of the way we handled information, going all the way back to the Gutenberg press in the 1400s, and then I would have to think through there, but with the radio, commercial radio in the early 1900s, and then commercial television in the 1950s, then personal PCs in the 1980s. This will date me, but I remember I got my first. I was the first kid in my high school with a PC, TRS-80 Model 2, and I was unboxing it during the episode on the TV of Who Shot JR. So if you're any younger than me, you won't know what that means, but all the old guys that are joining us either live or on demand later will know exactly the era. 1980 was the year that we discovered who it was who shot JR, and that was the beginning of the PC era. Then Internet Explorer came about in the middle 90s, 1995. Now we've got the internet to work with, and what a change that's been just in the last 30 years. And then you've got even more smaller but significant changes in the way we process and use information. The e-reader, Jeff Bezos told his crew, make an e-reader. And so the Kindle tablet came out in 2007, I believe. My wife took one on vacation. I made her use it. She wanted to use the books, and I'm like, no, this will change your world. And now she did not want to use it. Now she can't quit using the e-reader. So it's the way we I don't, without thinking this is overstating the fact. That's part of our webinar today is to get you to think this might just be a big deal in the way that we handle information if we can get a grasp of what it is, how it works, how it's going to be changing over time. And so that's why I've invited Josh to join us today. Also, there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And so anywhere along the way, if you've got a question for Josh in particular, or for me, I'd invite you to go ahead and click the Q&A button, type in your question as soon as you think it, not for later. And we have a queue on our screen of all the questions that might be asked. And then I can moderate those, either interject that in the middle of it, or we can get to it at the end, or even answer it after the fact via email. And so if you've got a question that you'd like to ask us, don't use the chat button, but instead use the Q&A button, because then we've got a record of exactly who asked the question that we can reply to. I interrupted myself. My beginning of this was in April. I was at a conference and was supposed to sign up for a workshop and didn't, as you know, most people do. And so I looked down the list, and the last one on the list, the Renew conference in Indianapolis, was AI and ministry. I'm like, that sounds interesting. So I jumped in, and in this room was a bunch of tech guys. And so they were all pro AI. I felt like the stranger in the room, but was just fascinated for the very first time, to be exposed to, oh, this is going to be a big deal. And so ever since then, I've been trying to orient myself with the articles that are coming out almost daily in the news, and YouTube videos about explaining what it does and how it works. I think most Americans are a little bit negatively disposed towards AI because of all the movies we've seen for the last 30 years, where AI always goes bad, always. And so we think there's got to be something wrong with AI, and we can list the movies going back to Terminator, or War Games with Matthew Broderick, or
War Games. Yep.
And then there's two or three every year, and it always goes bad. And so we're negatively disposed towards the opportunity that AI presents as a tool, and it's just a tool. That's all it is. And so you can use a tool for good reasons or for bad reasons, but it's a tool. And so I'm hoping that's the takeaway for everyone who's joining our webinar here today, is they think about, oh, I hadn't thought of it in that way. Maybe I should check that out a little bit. So Josh, jumping in, thanks for joining us today. But I'm wondering if you can give us your perspective on exactly what is AI. I think from the foundational level, coming on with a shared understanding of what we're talking about would be really helpful, because I think a lot of us have some preconceived notions about what AI actually is.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, thanks for having me on the webinar, Tim. I really appreciate it. We love Waypoint and the work that you do, and just consider, we consider you all formal partners with Plant and Revolution, and just truly grateful for the impact that you and Lisa have had on our lives personally. And so, yeah, really, really happy to be with you on this. And yeah. AI is an interesting, you hear about it in the news, you see it on, social media like crazy right now. Everybody seems to be talking about it. There's all these new tools that are coming out because of it. As you really dig into, hey, what are we really talking about when we talk about AI? The reality is, there's a lot of misconception around it. And, what we call artificial intelligence, oftentimes we think about it in terms of the way the movies have portrayed it. And it's this, sentient being that, has come alive and is now going to destroy it's human overlords or whatever. And the truth is, artificial intelligence is actually what the words say. It's artificially intelligent behavior. And so the reality is, when we talk about AI, what we're really talking about is something that appears to be intelligent because it is performing in ways that make it seem human. And so, it's not actually a thinking being for itself. And so there's a lot of misconception about that. And so I want to start there to say there's a difference between AI and AGI, which would be artificial general intelligence. AGI would be that thinking being that, I hopefully wouldn't kill humanity. But as far as we know publicly, AGI does not exist. And so there's a whole bunch of people, that are talking about it and saying, oh, this AI could, OpenAI's ChatGPT can become, its own thinking being and take over the world, that type of thing. And while there are absolutely dangers to it, it's not AGI. It's not actually a thinking being. And, there's a whole lot of advantages for people like Sam Altman, who is the CEO of OpenAI, going on and saying, hey, we got to like step back from this, slow down, and like, this could actually become a bad and scary thing for humanity. Well, it keeps him and his company in the news. Meanwhile, if you pay attention to AI news, they just patented and trademarked ChatGPT 5, the very thing he was saying, wait, we got to slow down about this, And so there's a lot of hype around it. And I think it's important for us from a pastoral perspective to really understand, what are we actually talking about? What are our people talking about, so that we can actually engage with them and help them understand that. AI has been around for a really long time, actually, since the 1950s, since really kind of the foundation of computing. And Alan Turing, if you've ever seen the movie Imitation Game, it's like the first computer was made to break the Enigma machine that encrypted German messages, and basically could perform calculations that humans couldn't perform in terms of speed in order to break this code. And the reality is, like, what we're talking about now when we talk about AI is a more advanced version of that. We have faster processors, and our algorithms have become more complex because of those faster processing powers. And so, it looks intelligent. Like, if you've played around with ChatGPT, it really does look intelligent. It seems like you're talking to a human, but it is derivative of human intelligence. So anyhow, also, I should probably qualify myself to say, I am not a computer scientist. I do not have a degree. So this is, me leading a tech company that has a ton of experience in the AI realm. We don't build, neural networks and that type of thing, but we actually kind of have become experts in utilizing them very effectively. So a little bit of qualification. Yeah.
That helps us understand that the only intelligence it can have is what we've trained it to have. And so it's only in this intelligent, and the fear is that they're going to get more intelligent in some way. I guess that's the large language model. I don't know if you could explain what that is, but that's, I think, the power of AI is that the computer has access to millions of books and all of the information and websites and documents. But
Yeah.
I remember in college, I had to write a term paper. I'd walk down to the library and get 10 books because you needed 10, citations in your term paper. And I'd walk back to my dorm room, and that was the breadth of my knowledge that I could really take my term paper from, was 10 books.
Yeah.
But the large language model, if you can explain that for us, is really just this computer's got the access to theoretically everything written ever, that's in print,
Yep.
and so if you had if that amount of knowledge at your disposal, which we do, then it starts to look really intelligent, just because of the scope of the information that it has to run with, rather than the limited scope we typically have. So could you explain what the large language model is for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, that is, you did a really good job actually of explaining it. The reality is, what it's doing is it's indexed or read everything that's been written for the most part. Like, if you're talking about Chat GPT, the reason it sounds human is because it has read everything that has been written. And unlike us, like, you think about somebody that's really well read, who's going to give you kind of a breadth of perspective and can talk about issues from one side to the other and knows everything in between, right? Like, that's, an incredibly impressive person to, engage with and talk to, that type of thing. But they're still limited by the ability to hold all of that information in tandem at one time, and effectively kind of think about it at one time. And that's really what a large language model does and can do. So because of these incredible processors that we have created, and processing power has like exponentially gone up in the last, in terms of if you're looking at the chart, in the last 10 years, it has dramatically hockey sticked to the point where it's just incredible what we can do with processors now. And so, like, ChatGPT is looking at everything that's ever been written, holding that in its mind, neural network at one time, and then can respond in a way that feels human, because it knows how to respond based on having read the way humans interact and respond to things. And so that's, we talk about training these models, that type of thing. What you're doing is you're taking that breadth of understanding, and then giving it context to say, okay, here's how a human would reply to this interaction. And it can literally take massive quantities of data and ingest that really quickly and learn how to respond. And then humans go in and train those models to say, yes, this was a good response. That was a good response. That was a bad one. And that's how it becomes intelligent. Well, it's not really quotes intelligent, but
Yeah. I had someone describe it, and I don't know if this is true. You and I, neither you or I are experts on this, but I've just been asking people, how does this work? And was just fascinated by, I don't know if this is true, but it sounds good, is that the computer reads so much that when it's writing something original, that it's really just writing it gets to a word, and then it's read so many millions of books that it knows that predictably the next word that humans would typically write there with some degree of certainty would be this word. And then when you've got those two words written, then it's read so many millions of books that the next word predictively that humans would write next would be this, depending on the topic and the context. But that it's really just doing, it's almost like a math algorithm of the odds of the next word are this, and the odds of the next word with this context put onto it is going to be this, and it just builds out this new original material. But it's not thinking about that topic. It's not thinking about, how do I plant my garden next spring? And it's giving me it's just predictively creating a document using what it predicts the next word would be in that document, because it's read so much of human information that it can create a new document just on the prediction of what the next word will be in the document. And so
yeah,
and so
I
that
mean,
hopefully
that's a great explanation of what what the large language model is actually doing. It's literally holding in tandem, not only just, not only just what its response is and what the next thing should be to it, but it's literally actually looking at every word in your question or your prompt and saying, okay, this is how these words all flow together. And it's math. It is literally using math to respond, to generate that response. Yeah.
All right. So I'm curious, kind of switching gears, so what are ways people are getting just average, not before we jump into ministry, but just normal people, not abnormal ministers, but normal people. How are they using AI? That has blossomed really, in the last 6 months in particular, but the last few years, in general.
Yeah. I mean, the reality is, like, it can do so many different things, and because it is advancing really, really quickly, there's all these new companies that, I mean, we've started a company that literally uses AI to help pastors, and there's tons of those companies, and the reality is, like, they're popping up all over the place. And so people are using it for all kinds of, this is what you want me to talk about, right? Like, just how is it being used? People use it for content, content generation. They use it for brainstorming. I mean, if you've jumped on Chat GPT or Claude, those are kind of the two biggest, most prevalently used platforms out there, or models out there, and played around with them. Like, it's an incredible brainstorming tool. You can literally ask it, like, hey, the other day I was playing around with a model and I was like, I want to plan a birthday party. And it literally prompted me with questions and just guided me through planning out a party. It just asked, like, okay, well, who's this birthday party for? And, what age rate, like, asked some demographic questions, that type of thing. And then was very suggestive about, well, what about this? What about that? And just went through and, laid out all this stuff. There's also image generation, and now even image interpretation and then generation. So it can, like, look at, a picture, tell you what's on it, and then you can interact with it from that. It can generate new images, video generation. There's some really cool stuff coming down the pipe on the video game front. So if you play video games, my kids are, like, super excited that they're going to be able to, like, make their own version of a video game. And so there's, all kinds of use cases for that. There's incredible use cases for chatbots that feel very, very human and can interact in ways that, we can't, because they have empathy, and they can have perfect empathy basically for a person. And instead of getting frustrated or upset, they can continue engaging in that way. And so yeah, and then like there's all kinds of, I mean, this is bridging into some of the ways that the church could use it, but like even on our platform, if you upload a sermon to it in Spanish, it will give you Spanish content in return. And so there's incredible translation opportunities that I think are going to be really, really cool, but also just human interaction and engagement opportunities on that front. And that's, we're barely scratching the surface at that point. It can do strategic planning. It can do scheduling and time management, planning events, budgeting. I mean, it can act as an HR rep, there's social media planning and content generation, all kinds of stuff, data analytics. Right. It's incredible.
Well, as a little bit of a tease, I want to shift to talk about ethics of AI here for a second, but then for everybody that's watching today, I'm going to shift gears to what are some real practical ministry uses for AI that Josh can tell us about. I've been asking preachers since April, how are you using AI? Are you, and if so, how, basically? So I've compiled a little list here that I'm going to share. And so hopefully you might be able to have a couple of takeaways of, man, I'll give that a try. But first of all, let's talk about a little bit about the ethics of it, because I think I sent Josh kind of a screenshot yesterday of a Facebook post about another AI webinar for ministry, and the comments about that AI webinar were like all of a sudden became the stream of everybody thinking this is straight from Satan, and so I thought, wow, okay, so there's people that are, and I can understand probably from a perspective of why they got there, but still, I don't think they understand exactly what AI is and how it can be used. And so, how would you talk about the ethics of AI? Is it okay to even have this webinar and talk about maybe we should use AI for ministry?
Yeah, I mean, the ethics situation or the conversation around the ethics on AI are really interesting to me. The church side of it is going to be really interesting, just because that's my background and probably all of our background. We can get into that in a second, but one of the things to remember is like, on the ethics side of things, and we're trying to build tools that are ethically based, obviously, and so we're really having to think about this a lot and engage on that front a lot in terms of the design of the tools that we're creating. The ethical conversation always follows innovation. Like anytime there's innovation, technology, it's always going to follow. The ethic conversation is always going to come after that. We have to figure out, okay, what do we actually do? How do we use this technology well? And so, there are a lot of dangers with these, large language models, which is what you're hearing about the most when we talk about AI right now. And those dangers need to be, assessed and monitored really carefully, both, in every use case. But the reality is, like, I think there's going to be an evolving conversation on this front. When we think about social media, it had a lot of unintended consequences, quite frankly. And, we're just now beginning to really see the unintended consequences of that in plain detail, where we have data around it and can truly assess the effect that it's had on us as human beings. And I think that we'll continue to discover that with social media and with AI. And so I think there's certainly some, pretty clear cut things that have already come out. Like, there are scammers that are using AI extremely effectively to attack and scam people very, very well, like in ways that were not possible before, because you can take an AI model and train it on someone's voice using a very small amount of data. And, if you've watched the news, like, had it call someone and pretend to have kidnapped their child and extort them for money, even though their kid is nowhere near that person at all. And so there's crazy stuff like that, right? Obvious misuse. There's also just outright manipulation. Like, one of the things that I'm extremely concerned about, both for the world at large, and also for the church specifically, is just the ways in which you can use these models to manipulate people. Like the 2024 election is going to be really, really interesting, and every election after that, because these models facilitate the ability to directly target people, not only with accurate and truthful information, but also with manipulative information based on a demographic profile and knowing how this person will respond. And instead of having to market to everyone broadly, as has been the case up to this point, and that's been changing with social media, you can literally design a model for every human being, like in our country, let's say, or in the world, really, that's very specifically tuned to them to get them to make choices that you want them to make. You know, the real thing that I think is going to come out as the biggest danger on this front is regarding our relationships and our connection. If there's it's a really, really brilliantly put together model called Pi, and it's made by a company called Inflection. And if you want to check it out, I'll add
Pi,
some.
pi, right?
Yep. And so they have an app, so you can download the app, and it is conversational. It will it's like talking to another human being, and it has like, it's called Inflection because of the way that they can modulate the voice to respond. It can laugh, it can tell jokes that are funny, and and it interacts with you like you would interact with Alexa, only nowhere close to as frustrating. It's like talking to a person. And I think that there's an incredible opportunity in that, and there is also a dramatic danger with that as well. I have a friend who was telling me that about a friend of theirs who got their elderly parent an Alexa, and that parent would have conversations with Alexa, and the comment was like, it's like nice that they have somebody to talk to. And I was like, man, that's so stinking sad, and I think that that's a danger that we're going to face, of like, is this going to push us closer together to more human interaction, which I think is the massive opportunity for the church, or is it going to separate us more and, create kind of I'll say it this way. We've been in conversation about this with our team a lot, of like a relational porn almost, where I always get what I want from this robot that is trained to do, to respond to me in ways that are going to make me like it more and use the platform more and stay on it. And it becomes this imitation of reality that's not real. And then I lose the ability to have empathy for a person who doesn't respond the way that I would like for them to. So not only for pastors, but even for our congregants and just humanity in general, I think that there's some big, ethical conversations that need to come around, like reminding people they're talking to a piece of technology that was created to do a certain thing consistently enough that they can't fall into the trap of becoming, desensitized to real humanity and the rawness that we bring to the brokenness that we all have. And, hopefully that won't keep pushing us apart. But I think that's really going to be a big piece for the church, where we have an opportunity to stand up and say, yes, we can use bots to help us be more empathetic towards one another, but we shouldn't trade the human to human interaction for something that is like, well, this is always going to do it right, so I'll just let them talk to a bot instead of talking to me as their pastor, or talking to one another in the small group and that type of thing. So
Yeah, I heard, I don't know if you saw, I'm sure you did, the first completely AI generated church service that was in England, I think, or
yeah,
Germany, a couple of months ago, and it was packed because people wanted to see what it was going to be like. But as they interviewed people on the way out, they were like, "It's all right," even though the programming of it, and they had avatars doing the welcome and doing the singing and doing the preaching. But at the end of the day, when they interviewed enough young people, young adults, they're like, the humanness was missing, and as long as we recognize that, that's the powers. We will always be able to pastor people. And that's something that computers should never be able to get to do, is to where we can empathize with people, sympathize with them, we can emote with them, and be there for them, and so I want to shift gears. I would say on the ethics piece that I think the initial ethics question is really mostly about plagiarism,
Yep.
because the difference between an AI and plagiarism, or the hitch, is that generative AI is generating new original content. And so it's not plagiarized from some article that was written 10 years ago. And so it's becoming, number one, increasingly difficult for professors or teachers to be able to identify whether it's plagiarized, because it's not. It is brand new original material. And so what are the ethics around that? And that's going to be fascinating to watch
Yeah.
the ethics evolve on that. I was in another session that I joined. I've been joining every session I can find. And they said preachers should, just like any other reference, they should reference uh, that I got this from an AI, that I asked an AI this question and here's the material I got. Just like you would say, I read Max Lucado's book and I'm taking this outline from him for my Christmas Eve sermon. Hopefully you would do that. Number one, that's ethics, is whether you give credit or not, right? And so the ethics are that I got this from an AI, and increasingly people are going to become not just okay, but it's going to become acceptable over time. It's not there yet, but the average person is going to go, okay, he went to the AI to get this outline. That's normal. But I think we shouldn't hide the fact that we've done that and claim it as our own generated material when someone else generated it. It just happened to be a computer.
Yeah.
But that's just the beginning of the ethics. But people have been unethical about copying sermons long before AI was ever here. Whether it was taking notes off a cassette or sermoncentral.com 20 years ago, or it doesn't matter. We've been copying sermons forever. The ethics are whether you're willing to do it or not. And then it's the mode, or of the communication that you're stealing it from is kind of moot. So I think the first practice for any minister that's on the line today is get used to saying, hey, I asked an AI this question to help me think through this, and here's the stuff I got from it. So let's talk about shifting gears. Probably what most people are on the line for today is, so how can ministers use AI in very practical ways? And I've got a list here. Where's my card?
Well, I can't wait to hear your list as well.
Yeah, well, it's all real simple stuff, and you've kind of hinted at a couple of them already that normal people can use, and just use that for a ministry application, like event planning.
Yeah.
Is that, how many events does a church do? Christmas Eve of service, or fill in the blank, some event you're going to do, an outreach event, or a church picnic or whatever. If you ask AI, hey, help me create an event to-do list, you can create that on your own, or you can have someone, an AI prompt you, and you go, oh, and it's still, you got to work it. It's not like the AI is going to do the work for you, but it's created a starting point. And I think that's probably currently the best use of AI for people in general, but ministry in specific. It was just as a great starting point to get you kickstarted. So that's the first one that you mentioned was an event, a birthday party, but that's true of any church event that you're going to host.
Yeah.
You ask AI to help you create a really good, plan for that event, and it'll knock it out in 15 seconds. It'll have something better than you ever started with.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so I'm happy for you to tell about your company in specific right here. So it's not just at the end. One of the questions that we've got we got a couple of questions here. Okay, one of the questions is about sermon writing. So we'll get to that in a second. But what are the applications that your company is trying to help ministers thrive using technology?
Yeah, absolutely. So our company is Flourish, but then we also have another one called sermons.tech. And the first product that we put out on sermons.tech is the ability to upload your sermon, and it will turn it into a host of different content. So it'll transcribe your sermon for you, so you can upload that to your website. You can have that on your videos, that type of thing, so that there's closed captioning and that type of thing if you don't already have something that you use for that. And then you can generate social media content from it, so it'll actually give you posts that you can use to post about the sermon. And that's getting ready to grow dramatically. We're getting ready to add clips for, if you have a video of it, it'll actually like break it down into little chunks and suggest, hey, this would be a really good clip for you to post on social media to kind of, remind people during the week or promote, the sermon that happened last week if people haven't watched, that type of thing. But then it also generates small group discussion guides, and that's really where we started out. We built a tool that allows you to create a small group discussion guide with a summary, icebreaker questions that are generated fresh every single time you create a new guide. It's got questions that, quite frankly, are better than just about any human being I've ever seen write questions. And so we have guys that joke, and I've done this myself, like, these questions make my sermon sound a lot better than it was. And so does the summary. And so, but it does a really good job of that. And just creating really not just questions about the sermon, but also application. And then we give some context in there, like, hey, this is why this question was asked, that type of thing. And so, so that's a few of the things. We're getting ready to roll out the snippet stuff here coming up soon on the video side, but then also we're going to roll out in the next probably 2 months a tool that we're calling Sermon Copilot, that is a sermon writing tool. I can talk about rather than commercial for that, I'll just talk about what I believe we should be doing ethically on that in just a little bit. But yeah, I can do a bunch of stuff like that. We also have these things called prompt buttons that are coming out next week. And they're basically, we've kind of taken the AI and trained it to do a whole host of different things. And so you can put a little bit of information in there, like your church name, your mission, your vision, the date you want to launch small groups, and what types of small groups you have. And it will literally design a small group launch plan for you and email it to you with 4 weeks of not just like, here's what you should do, but it'll give you the exact content. Here's what you should say on stage. Here's the email update content that you should put with an image recommendation. And here's a text message to send to your congregants beforehand, and all kinds of stuff. So that's kind of sermons.tech stuff in general. There's a host of other tools and uses that I'd be happy to get into.
There's other ones out there. I'm happy for you to share what you're doing, but you're in that mode of guys like you that are saying that we can use this for ministry. And I think the best description that I saw in another session I went to, a little webinar, was that hopefully what AI does for you in ministry is it's not a cheat to where you're cheating in ministry, but it allows you to do some things quicker, so you've got more time for people. Because the people part is the one thing that computers cannot replace, is the way we interact with people, human. And so, but if you spend this much time on administrative tasks and sermon writing tasks and social media tasks and all those that chew up 2 or 3 hours. I mean, if I could spend 2 or 3 more hours face to face with people in my ministry week, that's a big win. I mean, when I've only got theoretically 40 hours a week to work with, and so I can like improve my face to face time by 10%, almost. That's a big chunk of time, and it's just using a tool well. And so it's not cheating and stealing content, but being smart about the tasks that I regularly do. Can I do them quicker because I've got a quicker starting point, so that I can get done quicker and get back to spending time with people.
Yeah.
So here's so I've got my list here. You already described social media content and posting, the snippets, and it's surprising how good AI can figure out what was the good thing you said on Sunday. Because you think it's just random. You got a 30-minute sermon, it's going to go pick 30 seconds somewhere, but it can actually pick something pretty good what you said, and then create a video clip out it that you can post on Monday saying, hey, here was the good thing that Josh said in his sermon on Sunday. One of the things that I've started playing around with for everybody that's on this platform with Zoom is Zoom. And there's a number of widgets coming out, but there's a widget called Phantom that will take the notes of all your Zoom meetings and then create a summary, basically the minutes. So the notes will be basically transcribe it like closed captioning, but then it can give you a 1-page summary, like the minutes. Josh said this, then Tim said this, and then Josh said, yeah, what about this? And then if you click on that, it'll go to that part of the video of your Zoom session where Josh talked about that, if you want to, and it begins not at that word or that sentence, but the beginning of that frame where Josh started talking about that in general. It'll back up 10 or 15 seconds to find the beginning of Josh beginning to get into that conversation. And man, that tool was not around before January.
Yeah.
That's amazing that how many meeting secretaries do we have that's taking the minutes. Waypoint has quarterly board meetings, and our minutes are 10, 12 pages long, for a half day meeting. And theoretically, these widgets they just automatically do it. But then the power of then is how it figures out these were the important things that were said, and it's
Yeah.
surprisingly accurate on figuring out what the important things were. And so that's how it can pick that out of your sermon as well. One of our guys says he doesn't use it for sermon content creation, but sermon series outlining. Create a 7-week series on being a fill in the blank.
Yeah.
A Christ follower at work, where you make a difference in your workplace for Christ, and it'll create as much, and you can tell it how much specificity you want, but to help you think through how could I craft a sermon series on this topic. And that's something you can do on your own, but if that can cut the first half hour off of that for the week, that's awesome. You said Bible study application questions. One of our guys already doing that. Outreach event ideas.
Yep.
So just idea creation. And I was challenged on this recently. I was talking with a guy that is more tech oriented. And I was telling him, I typed into ChatGPT, give me 5 ideas about this. And I didn't particularly like any of the ideas. And so I was thinking AI is not good. And he said, well, I ask it, give me 100 ideas. And I was like, oh, okay. He said, out of 100, there'll be 2 or 3 that I like. And I didn't even think that if I ask a person to give me a bunch of ideas, I can't ask them to give me 100 ideas. I would ask them to give me 3 or 4 or 5 good ideas about outreach, but a computer doesn't care. You can say, give me 1,000 good ideas for outreach, and it's not offended that you've asked them to give that much content. And so the sky's the limit. So just ask as much as you want about, outreach ideas for an evangelistic church, for their community, offsite from their facility. And you can give it qualifying content so that it customizes the reply even better. So
Yeah,
that's
like
one.
what your location is, and it knows what the needs of your community are because it's read all of the reports that have been done on those needs and everything. And in a lot of cases, not always going to be perfectly accurate, but a lot of times if you give it the location context, it'll give you incredibly accurate responses to that.
Yeah, and what I'm slowly learning, I'm still a novice at this, but if you can keep your conversations or your queries active with your AI so that when you come back to it, you don't have to start the process over, and all the qualifying of the conversation to where it gets smarter and smarter about what you want. When you come back to that conversation and add another question to that conversation, you're still in that spot of the funnel of getting closer and closer. And you can come back a week later or a month later and pick up the conversation right where you left off, and you're not starting from square one again.
Yep.
And so that I didn't even know that until a couple weeks ago when I watched another webinar. Of course, this might be cheating if you think of cheating, but an impromptu devotion. Preachers, you go to church camp and they say, hey, will you do campfire night? And you're like, okay. So, and so you need an outline or outlines for sermons. Number one, if you learn, it's a learned process, and it's not exactly like humans so far on how you have to ask it questions to give it what you want, but to say, I want to write a sermon from this text, and here's then all those qualifiers that help it create. But it really comes up with a pretty good outline. And for all of it, it's about you taking it from there and making it your own.
Yep.
Just like when you've borrowed Bob Russell's outline, how much of it do you take? Well, you have to decide, but he gave you a starting point. Here's his outline for whatever. And then you have to add your own illustrations, change it around or whatever. And so there's a lot of sermon preparation, sermon research. One person in my query, I asked, "Hey guys, how are you using this?" They're asking it for illustration ideas. So
That's
not
what I was about to say.
outlines.
That's a great use. Like it's so good at it.
Yeah, and I haven't tried that yet, but I hadn't thought of it that way because I've always thought, well, the illustrations are me, right? But the illustrations, you're going to go find your illustrations somewhere, right? If you're going to go in the news, current events, or old school, we used to have illustration books, that we'd pull off our shelf. I got
Yep.
one in college from Vance Havner, and it was a book full of illustrations. This is no different. Functionally, you're just going onto the AI shelf for illustrations about marriage or illustrations about parenting or whatever. And again, I would have, before this other one, I would have asked it, hey, give me a couple illustrations, but now I'm going to say, give me 20 illustrations about this. And the more I ask it, the better odds I'll find an illustration that makes me think, oh yeah. And it might even be prompt of an event in my life where it is actually my story, but I would have never thought of that until I read it on the AI list of illustrations. It's like, oh yeah, when we were first married, I did that too, and so I can tell a story on me that's legit and not made up.
I
Um,
kind of
yeah,
just tag along for that, Tim, is if you give it even more context to say, give me like if you say, hey, here's the point I'm making, copy paste your point in your sermon into the thing and say, I'm going to give you a point that I'm making in a sermon about this. And then I want you to give me an illustration from history or give me 10 illustrations from history that would illustrate the point I'm trying to make here. That's a really good, we call them prompts, way to get the technology to actually like understand where you're going with it. And then also give you contextually like stuff oh, here's a Winston Churchill history, story from history that I never even read before and was like, man, this is crazy. And then I go look it up, see if it's really true. And then I'm like, oh man, this is amazing. Like this is
mhm.
perfect. Stuff like
Yeah,
that.
that's the new one that I've got to work with for sure. And man, that can give the depth to your sermon. The outline is great, but the illustrations are what create the depth of your sermon,
Yeah.
where it connects people to the logical train of thought that you're having. And so filling it out with great illustrations quickly. That's the thing is I don't have to run and read through my Vance Havner book for a half hour to hopefully find something. In 30 seconds, I've got 20 illustrations, and I just
Yep.
need to pick one that fits the best or that I can work with the most. Yeah. So
Yeah.
here's one that of course Waypoint's a little bit different with this, but policy writing uh, is I get emailed
That's a
at
good.
least once a month about, hey, is there a policy about fill in the blank? And interestingly, about an hour ago, I got an email from one of our church planters saying, hey, and it's on our church planter group site on Facebook. Hey, do you guys have a sex offender policy? We've got a guy coming to our church that we really want to influence for Christ, but he's on the sex offender list. How do we handle that? And some guys are chiming in, they've got some level of that, but I want to say, have you tried AI? And because I've done that now for a couple of questions where I say, I've got a couple things on file for a policy, but then I go to Chat GPT and say, create a policy on this for this kind of a church. And it's what it creates in 10 seconds is as good as or better than anything I've got on file. Now you still got to make it yours, make it your church, make it fit all the context. You can't just grab it and paste it in, which church planters are apt to do probably more than anybody, to be honest, myself included, back in the day. Uh, but I've been surprised at how good the policy was when you prompt it, this is what I'm looking for. And you can really kind of pare down to where it doesn't go off on some wild goose chase that doesn't help you at all.
Yep.
And
You can always tell it, I don't like that. Change this, and it'll regenerate the whole thing. I mean, like yeah, that's like
yeah,
one.
and that continuing prompt, you just keep telling it, no, try again, and so, yeah, actually just chimed in the chat. She spent 12 hours on a sex offender registering options, and chat GPT will be 12 seconds,
Yep.
and it'll be just as good. And you still have to read it and make sure every word works for your church, but 99% of it's going to work for your church, and you've got to be liable for the other 1% that doesn't work for your church and massage it to make sure it does. Um, some other things just for practical ministry stuff that guys are saying, and that I've used. References. I need to give a reference for someone, and you want to make it nice and original, but you don't want to say too much. And so I've created a reference, and I didn't cut and paste it, but the structure of the reference is like, oh, that's good, that's good. That fits for what I'm trying to say for this person, and it said it so much better. Thank you notes to volunteers. AI, and then I'm going to write it out, so I'm going to edit it to make it fit me. But you can write a great thank you note and not get writer's block because you've got a tool to help you get kickstarted. And so that's something that I've used. I'm looking down the list here. The interesting thing that you referred to is graphics creation, and it seems like that's a little bit behind the rest of it. It's going to really emerge in the next year or two. But I had one preacher send me a graphic that he created. It's kind of like how poor he was when they first got married, and got a picture of a kid in a hut that had adopted him and his wife, and he's got a picture of him and his wife up on the kids, like the poor kid in Africa had adopted them as, to support them. And he told it, this is what I need. And it generated a picture of a kid in a hut with him and his wife on the kid's wall, they were his compassion cup family, and it was just kind of a joke in the beginning of a sermon about how poor they were when they first got married. But that gives you an idea about the creativity you can use to create graphics, and you be only limited by your creativity on that, and your ability to become fluent in how to prompt the AI to generate what you're asking. And that'll be a learning curve. You won't go in the first time and ask it something, and presto, you get exactly the graphic you want. And so, I've tried a couple of times, and I've got to still get way better at it. But your creative arts people or someone in your church is going to be thrilled to figure that out. I don't know if I've seen on Facebook, Josh, have you seen this about music generation, song lyrics?
Oh yeah.
That now you can buy, which I've seen it on Facebook, custom songs for your, like a Valentine's Day was when I saw it, and guys are playing this song for their girlfriend for the first time that he quote wrote for her.
Yep.
And it's not bad, and so I thought, and I'm waiting yet to hear, and it won't be far from now where we hear the first worship song that was written by AI. The chords will not be difficult. I'm an old worship guy. The chords will not be difficult to figure out. Put a bridge in here. Here's the kind of, you can prompt it for where you're wanting it to run from, and it will create. And if you don't like it exactly, say, nope, try again and try again, and eventually you're going to come up with a brand new worship tune that actually is a meaningful tune. And did you steal it from Chris Tomlin or AI? It doesn't matter. If you lead your people to worship better, who to come from, and so
We're working on
I don't
that.
know if you've heard of that yet, but
Yeah,
have you heard?
we've been playing around with writing worship songs based on sermons, actually, like new worship songs based on sermons. But another thing that you could do right now is take your sermon, and we're getting ready to roll out a prompt button for this, which is just like our way of saying, like, we're good at writing prompts. We can make it easier for you. You just click a button, put in the information, and it'll click a button and generate, a really excellent set of content. But like one of them is like, add your sermon, and we'll give you the worship set for you. Like, here's what songs your team.
Sure.
If
Very
you're
natural
stuff, that works really well. If you can throw your outline in or whatever, that works really well. So yeah,
really helps. Yeah. And my first church plant a long time ago, 3 or 4 years in, we did a 13-week series on the book of Acts, but it wasn't the Acts of the Apostles. If you know the other title of the Acts of the Holy Spirit. And we were focusing on the way the Holy Spirit worked in the first century church. But our worship guy wrote a song that we sang all 13 weeks from the book, about our sermon series. And that's, so you just sparked my memory of, well, you could do that every sermon series now, is if you wanted to have a custom song for your church that's related to the sermon series you're going to be preaching. Man, how powerful would that be?
Yeah.
And so you're only going to be limited by your creativity. And then what's, I don't know what this is called. I'm too much of a novice, but the intersectionality of it to where AI is not going to be able to take a song and create graphics from it, or take graphics and create a song from it, or take a document and create a graphic from it. And so it's not just one mode, but is there a word for that? I don't know what that's called, but
Yeah, multimodal. I can never say it correctly, but yeah, multimodal models that allow you to like literally generate all kinds of content across, with one input, it'll take it and run with it.
yeah,
Yeah,
music, art, text, poetry.
yeah,
Uh, AI writes poetry.
amazingly.
Yeah.
Uh,
So anyway, that's going to be fascinating to see how that is generated in and how the church can use that to not just have one lane of content, but that's multimodal content that our church is generating, because people learn and process, or they're inspired in different ways.
yeah,
Some people are inspired audibly, some people are inspired visually, some more emotionally, and so to be multimodal in the way that we present our sermons or sermon series could really create depth to our sermon series that we've never had before.
yeah. I mean,
Uh,
that was our idea behind the platform we built, was honestly just like, man, I, I would spend so much time every week on a sermon, and then it'd be done, 30 minutes and you're done. And it's like, that is a grind. And then, this gives you the opportunity to have so much from it that can like really help people take it, apply it. I think it's actually going to be inspirational for a lot of guys to spend even more time really crafting excellent sermons, because they are able to do it more effectively and then also create a whole lot of other content that comes from it.
yeah, it's working smarter, not harder, right? I mean, the old phrase. I mean, that's what this allows us to do if we're willing to figure out how to use this tool. Whenever I get a new tool for my shop, I got to figure out how to use it. But I've bought it from Lowe's for a reason, because it's going to help me do a job better. And AI is that way. We can keep using the old tool like my grandpa did, or I can go buy the new tool at Lowe's that actually makes it even quicker, or better. It's the job is done better. Well,
Yeah.
Josh, our time's about up. I wanted to keep this to about an hour, so hopefully our those online. Uh, we've touched on the one question. Are there any other questions people would like to post? It's the advantage of coming live to a webinar like this, is you get to ask questions to the panelist. Any questions about AI, either on the application side, which one of our guys, I forgot to say, um, said AI is surprisingly adept at creating applications to your sermon points,
Yep.
because you think that's what we created. It's going to create the outline or historical, but no. Here's your takeaways. Here's what you can do this week with this content, and you put the content in so it knows what it's dealing with. And I haven't used that yet, but one of our guys, when I asked this week, said that blew my mind. That it's going to create even better, and that's the power in preaching, is when we can apply it to our life on Monday. And so if it can help us pick better applications for people to put their faith into practice on Monday, man, I'm all for it. So anyway, there's just so much we can use if we get over the scariness of the 87 movies we've seen where AI always goes bad. It's a tool. I've told you and told a lot of people, and I didn't hear this on a webinar. Just when I was talking about somebody, is, you can drive a car to rob a bank, or you can drive a car to take someone to the hospital. And the car is not the issue. It's where you're going with it. And AI, there's a lot of people that think it's horrible, but it's just a tool. It is all moral. And we can use it in some powerful ways if we're willing to use it to make us better as pastors, better as ministers, or at least quicker, so that we can spend more time with people. So Josh, thanks for your time. You're at flourish.com. Is that the simple name of where they could find you?
Flourish.com or sermons.tech if you want to engage on the church side with AI stuff, sermons.tech. Yeah.
Sermons.tech. All right. So we're happy to promote that just a little bit. But thanks for your time today. And
Yeah.
we are really looking forward to, I'm sure we're going to need to have you as a recurring guest a year from now and a year from now, because it's going to be a completely different conversation in 2024 than it was in 2023. I think it's going to disrupt the way we do ministry in really good ways if we pay attention.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to come back. That'd be awesome.
All right, folks. Thanks for your time, and our stay tuned for our next pop-up webinar that we're actually trying to schedule one right now that hopefully will help you in ministry as well. Have a great afternoon.